there is another consequence of today's news we haven't yet talked about, which is, are they ready for this? Do the main parties have their candidates in place and agreed? Have they got their proper full election manifestos actually signed off and even written? Have they booked the advertising space around the country? And if so, have they got enough cash to pay for it? Labour have been readying themselves for an early election now for quite a long time, so I assume they are properly ready, and indeed I have been told they are. But for many Conservatives who'd been assuming there wouldn't be an election until November, you just heard one, it is all a bit of a shock. To take the temperature, I'm joined by Michael Crick, the veteran journalist who knows more about candidate selection in Britain than anybody else, by Kelly Beaver, the chief executive of the polling company Ipsos UK, and my colleague from the New Statesman, that assiduous political correspondent, Freddie Hayward. Welcome to you all. Let me start with you, Kelly. We haven't had an election in modern polling times in July. There was one in 1945, very, very different. A lot of the electorate was still serving overseas and it took a long time for their votes to come back. Very, very different situation. But, we have an awful lot of big events coming up in the summer. We've got the Glastonbury weekend just before polling, the week before polling. We've got the Euros running all the way up through polling. Now, I think the actual polling day is a rest day for the Euros. And, we've got Wimbledon starting around the time of the election. And my question is, do those big events and the fact that so many people will already have booked holidays and to be away, is that going to affect the result of the election?
I think if you look at when this election is taking place, it's the beginning of July, so before many of the school holidays, certainly across big swathes of the UK. Not all. We know that in Scotland that is different and they will have already started their school holidays. So ultimately, I think the timing of the election in the summer is neither here nor there in many ways, Andrew. What we need to think about is the broader mood of the nation at the moment at which they go to the polls. If this had been an election in the October, November, December period, we may have seen an impact from things like the strain on public services around that time. The fact is it's happening earlier than that, and so some of those pressures could be alleviated as a result of it happening earlier in the summer.
So I'm sticking with the blindingly obvious or crude questions really here, which is, what about the weather? Because, in the old days, certainly, we used to say that, cold winter elections were bad for Labour because Labour folk had fewer cars and so on. That is way back in history. But a blisteringly hot summer election, the canvassers traipsing up and down the street, knocking on doors, and everybody outside in the garden or away in the park, there will be an impact. This is not going to be the same kind of election as in more temperate or cooler weather.
So I think the on-the-door impact is incredibly important when you come to the electoral canvassing. Those things really do matter. But again, ultimately, will people feel motivated to get out and vote? How will they feel as they come into that electoral period? And what is the overall mood of the nation about big issues like, is it time for a change? How do they feel about the direction of the country? And how do they feel each of the parties fares around the core issues? I often get asked around lots of very micro-level issues when it comes to the election. And often you can forget about the macro picture, which can drive more voter impact and behaviours than those very micro points. So sorry to dismiss your summer
election. You didn't dismiss my question,
and weather.
Just answered them.
British weather is of interest to everybody, I know.
Certainly is, certainly, particularly today with that ghastly image of the Prime Minister almost dissolving in the rain as he was trying to announce the election.
Can I just follow up what Kelly said before you ask me what I think you're going to ask me? The key thing these days, of course, is that getting on for a quarter of the votes will be by post.
That is true.
Postal voting on demand now. So people don't have to vote on July the 4th. They'll start voting round about June the 20th. And it's astonishing. You have this period of 2.5 weeks where people are already voting. There's a sort of early climax to the campaign because most postal voters vote within 48 hours of getting it. And that's changed the whole dynamics of campaigns. It's something that journalists very rarely comment on. But as for the fine weather, well, I think that will encourage people to go out and campaign. I mean, I remember 1970. I remember that was a June election. I remember, and really hot. And I remember June 83, and that was a hot election. So you get more people out campaigning. Politicians everybody's in a better mood, which I suppose may help the Conservatives in a way. But let's face it, most people don't get canvassed much these days, and a lot of it's on the phone.
Let me ask you about the candidacies themselves, because as I understand it, Labour has now selected and agreed candidates for almost every winnable seat. There's some in non-winnable seats they haven't done, but the Conservative situation is a bit patchier.
Well, I mean, all the parties are well placed with the selection of candidates. Not like 2017, where Theresa May called an election. Labour said it was a snap election, which was a bit odd because they've been predicting it for 8 months. But they still haven't selected any candidates. This time they have. The Conservatives have, as you say, got about 20, I think, of their current seats. Where people have retired, or new seats under the boundary changes where they haven't chosen. But things are underway there, and they've got plenty of time.
There may be more retirements to come.
Well, there will. There will inevitably be late retirements. I think probably you could expect perhaps 20 as many as 20 Conservatives. And I think there'll be quite a few Labour ones. And late retirements, the leadership, the party high commands love those, because it gives the party high command the excuse of saying, well, we're terribly sorry. There's no time to consult the members. You're going to have Bloggs or Smith as your candidate, and of course the members hate that. It's complete rubbish, that argument. In the modern era of internet and being able to have hustings on Zoom, as selections have already been doing in some cases, and being able to vote electronically, you should be able to organise a selection in 48 hours, frankly. And anybody who tells you otherwise is either stupid or dishonest, or probably both. But it's this fixing. And of course, what goes on, and what went on to Blair, is they say, well, hold on till late when you announce your retirement. You never know. You might get a peerage, and all sorts of duff. Not very talented Labour MPs ended up in the Lords so that Blair could get their seats.
Oh, dear. Freddie, let me ask you about another aspect of the planning for the election, which is the actual manifesto, because we've seen this, these 6 first steps from Keir Starmer, which felt like, frankly, last week the election campaign actually beginning. But there's an awful lot of detail, there's an awful lot of unresolved things, and we still haven't seen the proper Labour manifesto. From your understanding, how advanced is that?
Well, I was speaking to one Labour aide earlier, and they said they were ready for this election from March 17th. We had a story in the New Statesman back in February that all the shadow cabinet had to submit their policies by then. So they should be quite far advanced. Labour have been expecting this. They've been briefing, as you know, Andrew, for months and months, saying that they expected an election before the summer. I think the bigger question is for the Conservatives at the moment. I was speaking to some Tory MPs today, and they were sort of gobsmacked that it had been caught here because they didn't feel like they were ready. I think you're already seeing that there hasn't been a clear, consistent message coming from the Conservatives. And we've seen that for 6 months now. He's had 4 or 5 different narratives. And which one is he going to lead into for the next 6 months? 6 weeks, sorry.
He was doing his oratorical best today. But if you ask yourself, what would Britain look like if Rishi Sunak had another 5 years? It's a hard question to answer, isn't it?
It is indeed. And he lent into that sort of, there's an age of insecurity and we need to respond to that. Well, that's fine, but many people think that the insecurity that we're currently undergoing is the fault of the Conservative Party. He had a choice when he came in to separate himself from his predecessors, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson and the rest of them. He didn't do that because he wanted to maintain party unity, and now he's bearing that cost. And the key thing is, as you say, what is his vision in 5 years' time? The Labour Party can talk about a decade of national renewal. You can dismiss it if you like, but they can point to that, and they've got 6 steps, however fatuous or facile you might think they are, but they can point to them.
And 5 missions. Don't forget the 5 missions.
There's 11. But the Conservatives don't have an equivalent, and that'll be a problem.
There's a contradiction, isn't it? They're at the heart of Labour's campaign. I mean, there you saw Starmer on the platform with the change slogan there. And yet, in reality, most of this manifesto, which I imagine is going to be a rather thin one, there isn't going to be much change in it. On Ukraine, there's going to be no change. On taxation and spending, there's going to be hardly any change. Throughout the last few months, Labour's been telling us all how what they're going to do isn't that much different from what the Conservatives are doing. The change they're offering, really, is a change of personnel and a change of
But that will make, Kelly, a bit of a difference to the country. As I understand it, it'll be the most, if they win, it would be the most working-class cabinet we have seen in British politics ever. And the country will just feel different. But, you're the pollster here. And I have to come back to the polls because they are so extraordinary. 20 points ahead all over the place.
21 with us, Andrew. 21.
Well, that's ominous, because that's what Theresa May was ahead.
There you go. And somebody said that some of the internal polling for the Conservatives shows them 30 points behind. Now, the entire industry would have to be historically wrong by an extraordinary margin for Labour not to win this election. Isn't that the truth?
I think what we're seeing is the beginning of the campaign polling numbers, and we know that the Labour lead is soft. We know that half of the public are telling us that they are undecided and they may change their minds, and we know that exists within the numbers. There are a group of persuadables within that, and I know both Labour and Conservative camps will be focused on that.
We're talking about people who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 and haven't decided what to do now.
There are, but there are also undecidedbles in many of the seats up in Scotland as well, people who haven't decided there. These are all, very borderline constituencies. There's a lot of potential for things to move, and we do tend to see that the voting does narrow and the voting intention polls do narrow. And if you see what's happened in the last couple of days, like why has Rishi Sunak called this now? He can see green shoots, he can see announcements on inflation, and we've seen the economic optimism tracker that we've got move and shift in a more positive direction just on Monday when we put out the most recent results for May comparatively to the last quarter and comparatively to the quarters before that. New stats on migration, and of the big issues that matter to the public, immigration and the economy are two of them. There are two more.
If they're moving in the right direction, you'd wonder why he's calling an election now, not in November. But I'm going to put the two of you onto the spot. This is going to be a regular feature of this programme from now on, and ask you what you think, broadly speaking, the Labour majority is going to be, unless you think the Conservatives are going to win, in which case what their majority is going to be. Michael.
Well, I said on an LBC programme, I think at the time of the Labour conference, that it would be a Labour majority of about 60, and I'm going to stick to that because I think that the Labour, as Kelly says, the Labour vote is soft. And the key thing about it is there's no great enthusiasm for Labour or for Starmer. If you say to people, why are you voting Labour? They say to get the Tories out.
Yeah.
And that they may, there isn't the enthusiasm. It's not like 1997 where you had people had become huge admirers of Tony Blair, and Labour had a substantial policy programme.
I'm going to go for 70. Just so I can beat Michael.
Sweep up everything above more. That. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm above that still, just because I think when the country makes its mind up that it's time for a change, it thinks big. But we'll see. We've all put our
figure, though,
numbers. I think the figure's going to be above 100 myself. Right. But anyway, it has been, of course, a momentous day. So back tomorrow. Do join us.